GRACIEMAG.com Choke MMA podcast. And now your hosts, Erik Fontanez and E. Spencer Kite.
Hey, party people. Welcome to the GRACIEMAG.com Choke MMA podcast. I am your host, Erik Fontanez, and with me, as always, every week, every Friday, is ESK himself, E. Spencer Kite. Spencer, what's going on, my man?
Good day, sir. I like that it's every week, and as always, wow, this is our debut show.
It is our debut show. Episode
But it's sort of letting
1.
people know that going forward, I will always be around.
You will always be around. Of course, there may be a day where you call in sick with the flu or chicken pox or something like that. I'm not sure what. And in that case, I'll call somebody else, somebody that I'm probably not going to pay to do this, just like you.
Probably someone more qualified and who sounds better on podcasts as well. But what are you going to do?
But I will tell you this.
I'm here for now, and my name's in the logo, so I feel a sense of security.
You do. You should feel a sense of security because I am not going to go ahead and have that logo redone. And if I do hire somebody else, I'm just going to call them E. Spencer Kite.
That's right. Their new name is, for the purposes of this show, you will be E. Spencer Kite.
Exactly. So, for this show and every show going forward, we will review the weekend news. That's why we're broadcasting this on Friday, because all the fun stuff happens Monday through Thursday. Nothing ever happens on the weekend except for fight cards. Isn't that right, ESK?
This is true.
It is true.
This is true.
And tomorrow is going to be...
you maybe get one thing announced here and there, but, that's usually Dana at the end of a press conference saying... as everybody's packing up, looking sort of shaky and saying, Gray Maynard and TJ Grant, winner gets the next fight. See you later.
Yeah, it's funny. Which
is really funny. Like, we're done here. Oh, by the way, this is the next title fight. No questions. See you later, folks.
Exactly. And it's funny. I was there when he actually said that at UFC on Fox 7 last week in San Jose. We were in the scrum, and everybody's kind of just hoping he'd say something newsworthy. And he actually said, yeah, TJ Grant, Gray Maynard. There, I gave you guys one. He actually said, there, I gave it to you guys.
We
were all like, hey, high five, buddy. Thank you very much. And just going back to what our show format is all about, tomorrow is UFC 159. Jon Jones will be defending his UFC light heavyweight title against the one and only mouth of the UFC, Chael Sonnen. On this specific show, we will be previewing the main card and the main event. And every show that we broadcast before a major fight card, we will preview that card. So, UFC 159 today, UFC, name a number, every show thereafter. So,
yes.
First thing we're going to get to, though, is the weekend news. So this week, Matt Mitrione had his suspension, quote unquote, lifted. He, of course, is the meathead that was suspended on April 8th for coming out and saying some very vile things about Fallon Fox. The UFC acted quickly and went ahead and, again, I use this word very lightly, suspended him. The suspension was lifted on April 24th. So for a total of 16 days, I'm sure he learned his lesson. And will never speak ill words of Fallon Fox or anyone else ever again. ESK, give me your take on this because I know you're dying to really share your opinion.
I thought at the time of the suspension that it was sort of, and we've known this all along with UFC suspensions and sort of punishments, is that they're sort of hollow token gestures, because for most fighters, like, unless you're going to actually give them a 6 to 9 month suspension, there's no difference between being suspended and just not having anything booked. And so the weird part is to me, like you said, that 16 days after there was the big Matt Mitrione's suspension, pending further discussions and
he's
inquiries.
Suspended. He's going to learn his lesson. All 16 days he's going to be wondering why he said that.
Yeah, and here's the code of conduct, and these are the things we're going to look at and hold people to. But now we need to make a fight for Brendan Schaub, and Matt Mitrione fits the bill. So he's still suspended, but a couple months from now he's going to fight.
My thing is this. if they're going to suspend him and then lift it this quickly, okay, fine. But you also say there's a fine associated with that. Come out and tell us what the fine is. If it's a huge amount like Dana's saying, go ahead and tell us what it is so the media is not going to be looking at this and saying, hey, this is just a slap on the wrist. We're not going to take this seriously. Your UFC code of conduct is just toilet paper that people use to wipe their asses with. So, that's my take on it. What do you think?
Yeah, I feel the same. I mean, it's one of those things that you see it now, and like you said, a lot of people, the reaction sort of yesterday afternoon and last night when that fight was announced, had the same reaction of, this seems like a slap on the wrist. It seems like the token, air quotes, suspension that we thought it would be. How are they decide? Like, how is this stuff being decided? How are we supposed to have faith in this code of conduct when 16 days ends up being the amount of time that he seems to be suspended for? It's one of those things that, and I mean, Dana and the UFC aren't going to come out and tell us what the fine is.
Of course not.
I don't even think that would really change things for a lot of people, because they would argue whether it's too much or too little, or how come he gets fined and other guys that have said dumb stuff in the past didn't, and all of that stuff.
Well, maybe,
to me,
maybe finding him
would problem though is what we need to do.
Maybe finding him and coming out with the figure will set the precedent, and from that point going forward, they'll have the opportunity to say, hey, if you say something naughty, this is what the penalty is going to be. So if you don't think you can afford that, go ahead and shut your mouth, and don't do interviews after your fight. Only do interviews leading into fights, because those are the only times that fighters should be doing interviews, and journalism is stupid.
See, I would have hope that this would be the starting point, but I had hope that during the fabulous 3-pack of Forrest Griffin, Rashad Evans, Miguel Torres stupidity, in and around rape jokes and Penn State jokes, everybody would have learned their lesson to just stop saying dumb shit. And that didn't seem to be the case. And I mean, people are going to say weird stuff all the time, and they're going to get penalized for it. I mean, it looks like, as you said, a slap on the wrist, and nothing that anybody really has to be concerned about, because for 16 days, Matt Mitrione was suspended, which all that meant was he didn't have a fight booked. Really, it's not like they can prevent him from training. It's not like a suspension in another sport where, you can't practice, you can't be with the team, whatever those situations may be. You don't miss the next game. You're just sort of on the sidelines when you're on the sidelines anyways. So it really, to me, is a bit of a hollow gesture and just a show for the public of, look, we care. And that's not to say that the UFC doesn't, support the LBGT community and didn't sit down and have a lengthy conversation with Matt Mitrione, didn't find him, haven't come up with some sort of program moving forward. But we don't know all of those particulars. What we know is Matt Mitrione is suspended. We're really mad. He's suspended. He's fined. 16 days later, we need him to fight. He's booked for a fight. And that just on the surface looks pretty lame in terms of your code of conduct and your punishment for something very heinous that was said.
Yeah, he came out and said some pretty bad things. I know if I came out and said some things like that on Twitter, I'd get hammered, because I'm famous and everybody reads into what I say. Not really. But, he said some pretty bad things. The UFC, put on a good show by immediately acting on it and saying he's suspended. I think, they got some high fives when they did that. Hey, good job, buddy. You did well. But now, with it being a little over 2 weeks later and him getting another fight, it just doesn't strike me. The UFC code of conduct just doesn't strike me as something that they're really sticking to. It seems more like guidelines than rules, kind of like how they say in Pirates of the Caribbean, they're more like guidelines instead of rules. And, yes. So you can't really take them serious. At this point, I start to question what Matt Hughes is doing with his new position of executive vice president of conduct, or whatever he is.
Right.
What's his official title? Do you remember his official title?
I don't, and sort of to tie into that between the two is Matt Hughes didn't exactly have great things to say. I believe Matt Hughes in a Q&A also referred to Fallon Fox as it, which is objectionable to me and several million other people, and so it does sort of give you that pause of, okay, here's the words on paper, but if they're not put into practice and if they don't carry any weight, then they're just that. They're just words on paper that we look at and you can post up on the wall somewhere and say, well, look, we've got a code of conduct.
Yeah, look at that. You see that? Fits in that frame on that wall. We're going to keep it there. So to remind you guys, we have guidelines. Yep. Check that out. White said that the suspension was their opportunity to review things. He sat with his people and they reviewed things. I mean, do you buy that? That's what the suspension was meant for? Or do you think they said, oh, shoot, we've got Brendan Schaub that needs an opponent. Let's just go ahead and lift this suspension that we put Mitrione on?
I mean, I don't think, like we said, the value of a suspension in the UFC isn't the same as it is as we think of in other sports, because you're suspended for the next 2 games, 4 games, 8 games, whatever it is. Whereas in fighting, you may not fight for 3 months, 4 months. And so to say you're suspended, you're still just doing the same things you were doing anyways, because it's not like you have to report to the UFC gym or the UFC training facility to prepare for your fight. You do your own thing out and away wherever you are. So extending it to this great long period is really, to me, the only way. Like skipping a turn in the rotation is almost the way I would think of it. If you want to have some value to it, and if you want it to actually carry a message and show that you're committed to this kind of stuff, make it the length. Make it 6 months, make it 9 months, make it, if you would normally fight every 4 months, skip that fight, skip the fight with Brendan Schaub. Unfortunately, Matt, you're not going to fight for the next 8 months because what you said was incredibly stupid, and
meathead. There
has to be some kind of penalty.
Yeah. Make it length of Nick Diaz's suspension for weed. That's what I'm thinking. Something like that.
There has to be some actual, and as we said, we don't know the amount of the fine. We don't know what the conversation was with Matt. We don't know if, he's agreed to do service work within that community or anything like that. We don't know any of those things. The particulars we know, though, makes it look like a very hollow suspension and sort of just a PR display.
Very well put, Mr. ESK. That's why I brought you on as co-host, because your opinions make sense. You back them up with substantial evidence. And I give you a high five for that, sir.
I try. I appreciate that.
No problem,
It just seems to work better that way.
Well, you know what it is? It's because you're from the Canadian Southwest. That's why.
I am. I am. We covered this off air. I live in Victoria, British Columbia, Canada, which is on Vancouver Island, which is the western and one of sort of the furthest south you can get on the west coast of Canada. And so Eric finds it exceptionally funny that
I think it's awesome.
I live in the Pacific Southwest of Canada.
Yes. It's a much better place than where I live, ugly Southern California, where nothing great ever happens. Wait, I was supposed to switch that around and say that your place sucks. Oh, well. Hey, it's episode 1. We're going to have foul-ups. Whatever.
Yes, we will have mistakes.
Moving on. Dominick Cruz will not be stripped of the bantamweight title, per Dana White, during a conference with reporters earlier this week. He's quoted in MMAJunkie.com as saying he's going to keep his title, and when he comes back, he'll defend it, White said. But if he got hurt again, then we'd have to say we're stripping you of the belt. ESK, what's your take on that? Should Dominick Cruz keep his bantamweight title, or should they shut up already and just give it to Renan Barão because he's destroying every other 135-pounder in the world?
I don't necessarily think they should give it to Renan Barão just because of the body of work he's put together in Dom's absence.
What?
But
how do you not? He's working dudes.
But I think the precedent is there in terms of champions and injured champions to give him the belt on that grounds. It just helps that he's clobbering dudes as well. I wouldn't just look at it and be like, well, he's killing dudes and he'd probably kill Dom anyway, so let's just give him the belt.
Yeah, but Dom's been gone for so long.
Yeah.
It's been a really long time. And off air, we were researching it because we can't remember everything. We got to go to Google for everything that we talk about. It's been, 18 months since his last fight?
Yeah, it's been 18 months since his last fight. And just to be clear here, I agree with you that it's probably time to strip Dominick Cruz of the title. I think to me, I would base it on the Frank Mir injury situation, which is the only comparable situation we have, which was 14 months after his motorcycle accident. He was stripped of the title because he wasn't going to be able to return to fight Andrei Arlovsky. And then another 5 months later, he returned to face Marcio Cruz. So Dominick Cruz has now been out for 18 months. He's probably another 4 to 6 months away. And so you're looking at a good 2 years without fighting, which to me is time enough. And that's, again, provided that everything continues to go well in his recovery. He's had 2 surgeries now, and he had to have that second one because the first didn't take. And so get into that area of, and we talked about this before we started taping, do you even want to come back and face a guy that's absolutely crushing people like Barao in your first fight in 2 years? Or would it be better for Dominick Cruz to come back and have that sort of warm-up fight, or that test out my knee and see where I'm at fight?
And who does he do that with? I mean, you talk about guys that are near the top of that weight class. You're always going to think Uriah Faber. And, maybe another fight with him will sell, especially if it's his comeback fight. If he doesn't have the belt, what other fight do you put Dominick Cruz in other than Uriah Faber when he's trying to get that warm up shot to get back into title contention? Do you agree with that? Or do you think Here's the thing. Do you think he should keep his title and come back to fight Renan Barao?
I think if he's keeping his title, if they're not going to strip him, then absolutely. You can't have the champion come back and fight anybody than the guy that has the other half of that belt. I would not be opposed to Dominick being stripped, not because I have any ill will towards Dom. He is a great dude and always been a great interview. But I wouldn't be opposed to him being stripped, coming back, and entering back into that number one contender position where he gets the opportunity to face a guy, as you said, like Faber, like Eddie Wineland, like Michael McDonald, somebody in that upper crust of the bantamweight division. Winner gets the title shot and go from there. Just so there is that time to make sure, because live competition is a lot different than going hard in the gym.
I am going to go ahead and take back everything I said, and we should strip Renan Barao of the title and straight up give it to Eddie Wineland, because he grew an epic mustache a la John Sullivan handlebar, and it's just phenomenal. I saw that last weekend over at the UFC on Fox Fights. We were talking a little bit, and I said, well, what spurred the change? And he basically said, got to have an image, got to come out with it. And just because of that, I'd give him the interim strap on that alone.
See, but Ian McCall beat him to the mustache in the UFC, and Ian McCall has had the mustache for a long, long time.
He's in the flyweight division, completely different divisions. It doesn't matter. I say whoever has the John Sullivan mustache in any division you're in should have the title. And if you don't have the title, you should at least be in title talk. I mean, if we're in an era,
in each division should grow the mustache. Is that what we should just have like a group of dudes that are rocking the same mustache, one in each division?
Can you imagine Lyoto Machida with a John Sullivan mustache? I mean, serious? I mean, forget everything that he's done. Forget all the people that he's fought. If he had that mustache, I mean, it's amazing to think that he'd be able to pull that off over the Fu Manchu. Like, that alone says, hey, that guy should fight Jones next.
That guy's dangerous. Look at his mustache.
He really is. I grew a lot of facial hair myself, but I can't do the handlebar thing. Maybe it's because I'm Caribbean, or half Caribbean, Puerto Rican, half Mexican. I really don't know what I am because I get confused with Armenian a lot. When you first met me, ESK, what'd you think I was?
See, I think we cleared it up pretty early because we had the running jokes of like a colleague of ours confused us. And so you were the American ESK and I was the Canadian Erik Fontanez. And so I wanted to know what my pseudo heritage was. And we cleared it up pretty early that you are indeed Puerto Rican.
I am.
But I would have been somewhere in that Latin American area, Caribbean area.
Well, obviously I work for GRACIEMAG, and, being with a bunch of Brazilians, I always get confused for one of them. I still don't know how to speak Portuguese. I keep telling my boss, Luca Atala, I keep telling him that I'm going to get Rosetta Stone eventually and that he and I are going to have a full conversation in Portuguese, but that's just not happening yet. 6 months into me being with this company, I still have not learned how to say anything other than parabéns and obrigado.
You probably should. I mean, look at our friend Karen Bryant did the exact same thing, does a wonderful job with her Portuguese at press conferences. First time I saw Karen break it out at a press conference, I was impressed. Like, because it's one thing to do it. You're sitting at home, you're doing a phone interview with somebody, and then there's nobody around, like there's nobody watching.
Yeah.
But when you're comfortable enough to break it out at a press conference,
kudos to you.
Kudos to you. So shout out to Karen Bryant and her very well-developed Portuguese.
Yes, good for her. By the way, she got it through Rosetta Stone. She got it down through that.
Yes, she did.
So I got to, at least try to rip that off of her.
Right, absolutely.
Moving on, Phil Davis came out in the news today, and if you want to consider it news, you can. If you don't want to consider it news, it's up for debate. Whatever. TMZ reported... I say TMZ loudly because that's who broke it first. Phil Davis is accused of sexual assault. Now we say accused. We're very careful with this word. We're not saying he hasn't been charged with anything of the sort, but he's been accused by his baby's mama of having some rough sex unconsensually. So yes. TMZ came out with it. I think Bloody Elbow came out with a story about it, just really pointing the finger at certain parties, and it looked kind of slanted. ESK, you and I were talking about this before we started recording. You went on a 20-minute rant, and I informed you that I'll give you this entire section to give your take on what media's role is with this particular kind of story, but you have to keep it to at most 7 minutes. So ESK, Give me your take on the Phil Davis story.
My take, and my take that I gave to you in 20 minutes that I will condense to 7 or so. I understand the necessity of reporting this story. As you said, it was broken. Phil Davis is fighting this weekend, so he's a guy that we're already discussing in the context of he has a fight coming up tomorrow against Vinny Magalhaes, and these accusations have
Magalhaes! Sorry, go ahead.
To me, it gets into that area of this is, as we've come to learn and sort of in reading these reports and hearing a little bit from Phil Davis's camp, it's a custody battle. It's a he said, she said thing. The mother of his child is saying this is what happened. Phil's side is saying that's not what happened. In fact, she's the aggressive, attacking, weird one here and things like that. So to me, when it's clearly, and we don't have any like definitive, as you said off the top, no one's been charged. Nothing has come of this other than the accusations and the report by TMZ. To me, it's hands off for me personally. It's not a story that I'm going to report, not because I don't feel these things need to be reported and I'm trying to shield fighters and protect anything like that. I don't know enough about the story. We don't know enough about the story other than this person said X, somebody else said Y. And so if you want to put that out there, cool, that's up to you. Those are your choices. The other part of it to me is that we report these stories, which I will just block together as sort of the negative, the bad stories, but very seldom do we report the myriad good things that these fighters and these athletes are doing in their communities on a daily basis. We're not covering those things nearly the same because positive stories don't generate as much traffic as scandalous stories. The other side of it is, the headline on Bloody Elbow today, they're the only ones they're where I saw the story first and how I got to this story first. Their headline is Mother of Phil Davis's child claims Davis choked her during sex as she pleaded for him to stop, threatened to kill her.
That's a long headline.
That is a long headline for one. Like, journalistically speaking, that is a long headline with a lot of information.
I probably would have gone with Phil Davis and baby mama drama if I was covering the story.
I think that's almost what TMZ had, which was pretty close.
Yeah.
To me, if you're going to run that headline, there is a duty to follow this story from start to finish. Mm-hmm. And when we get to a resolution or we get to some conclusion, if it comes out that the mother of Phil Davis's child, is just making this stuff up, there needs to be an equally long, verbose headline explaining that Phil Davis didn't do anything.
Verbose.
You're putting him out here as this is maybe what happened. These are the claims, big, bold type, scandalous headline, TMZ style. But you're going to print, you're either A, not going to print the final outcome, or A, here's what really happened. Turned out she was crazy. Or you're going to print it somewhere in the back pages that a lot of people aren't going to read it. And that to me is just, we focus on the tabloid stuff and we focus on the bad because it generates much more traffic than the story of one of these athletes going out into their community and doing something good, going to a school and talking to high school students. Then countless numbers of them that go to community centers and youth facilities and penitentiaries or juvie and talk to these kids and people in our society about improving their lives or doing good things to improve life for people. So why do we feel the need to absolutely spotlight these scandals and these bad negative headlines when we're not sort of balancing that out with the positive aspects and the positive things that these guys are doing?
I don't know about you. I don't know about you, but I never, ever report that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Never. I lie. I have reported it a few times in the past because, I thought it was newsworthy, and then I got a whole bunch of nasty emails, tweets, and Facebook messages saying stuff like, you're a jerk, you're stupid. And, in retrospect, I look back on it and say, did I really need to report that story? Probably not. But at the same time, that's the interview that you gave me. And so this is what I have to go with.
And I will say I benefit from having my own blog on a site with theprovince.com, a newspaper based in Vancouver, where I'm not expected to do news. I have free reign to write whatever it is that I choose to write on a given day. And if I don't choose to write that day, I don't have the same pressures as a website that is a news site. So I understand that we're in a little bit different situations, myself and some of these other entities that choose to publish this stuff. And to me, it's a story that, because we don't know enough of it, because there's nothing more than he said, she said, I'm just going to stay away from it and let it play out and see what happens.
And I made a point about this earlier. If I was, if I was looking into the story and I broke the story, sure, I'd report it. I'd put the he said, I'd put the she said, only because that's fair. I mean, that's journalism. If you get one side of the story, you got to get the other too, and you report it as it's given to you. That's your responsibility as a journalist. But I'm not going to go out and regurgitate the same news that TMZ said, just taking all their quotes and putting it up on GRACIEMAG.com or whatever, just so that it's going to drive traffic. It's just not the type of news that we're into. Again, if I was following the story and I broke it, different issue. And if I did that, I'd do exactly how you were talking about. We have a responsibility to follow the story. You have a responsibility to say, okay, here's the fallout. Here's what happened. And this ended up being the case. Because so if you leave it at that, if you leave it at he said, she said, and then let sleeping dogs lie.
If there's nothing more written about this, then it's, to me, careless and a little bit callous. I'm not gonna lie. It's a little bit, putting Phil Davis on blast for something that we don't even know for sure he did.
And there's also the thing about the timing of the story. I mean, I'm not the biggest conspiracy theorist, but he has a fight tomorrow on the main card of a pay-per-view. And then all of a sudden, baby mama drama. He choked me. Man, she's crazy. She put a gun up on Facebook and said, I'm going to die. Like, what is all that about? Why is this coming out now? Do you think there's something behind that, or am I just watching too many X-Files episodes and conspiring too much?
I, like you, think it's a little interesting that Phil Davis hasn't fought since his win over Wagner Prado. Hasn't really been a lot of Phil Davis news or mention. There's been a good sort of stretch of time where this could have came out or could have been reported or could have been a story then, yet it comes out 2 days before he fights or a day before he fights.
A day, 24 hours, mind you.
So it sort of seems a little like, well, you're already talking about Phil. Let me grab a little attention here. You're already talking about this guy. Did you know this is what he's like? Mm-hmm. And again, it's he said, she said. It's here's some pictures she took that she said were caused by this and that and the other thing. It's a whole mess of stuff that my approach is, you can find the story elsewhere. I don't need to write it.
But you could also find the story here because technically we're reporting about it.
Right.
By the way, breaking news at this very moment. I mean, it won't be breaking news once this podcast airs, but just now, Jon Jones and Chael Sonnen weighed in for their UFC 159 main event. Both fighters at 205 pounds, right on the money. The main event is a go, and we will preview that in our very next segment, UFC 159 preview. So, we have a pay-per-view card tomorrow. Yay! We all get to spend $55. Some of us get to write it off, but the majority of us will not. We'll only see it on our cable bills and say, man, was I drunk when I ordered that. Jon Jones will defend
It's only
his
$50
title.
here in Canada.
Oh, screw you, Canada. Jon Jones will defend his UFC light heavyweight title in Newark, New Jersey at the Prudential Center against Chael the Mouth Sonnen, who I don't think anybody's arguing against this, talked his way into this title opportunity. I mean, let's break it down. It was this title fight's happening because they needed a couple of interesting coaches for the Ultimate Fighter. Sonnen was available. Jones has a belt. They made it happen for an entire season 17, and now they're fighting for the title, and hopefully it's over quickly. But before we get into previewing the main event, let's talk about the entire main card. Opening up the pay-per-view is Miller versus Healy. Jim Miller versus Bam Bam. We were talking about this a little bit before, and we both gave our picks, but ESK, I'm going to go ahead and let you open up.
My take is this is a very, very tough matchup for Pat Healy.
It's okay. You can say bad matchup.
It's a bad matchup, but stylistically, it's not an awful matchup. They have comparable styles in that Pat Healy is a top position grappler. He's very good control on the ground. He is a big lightweight. He fought at welterweight for a lot of his career and has wins over some people that you will recognize if you look up his record. Carlos Condit, Dan Hardy, Paul Daly being among them. I just think Jim Miller has looked so good as of late. And I know people are going to say, what are you talking about? 2 fights ago, he lost to Nate Diaz. His only losses are to champions or championship contenders. Mm-hmm. And he's coming off that dominant performance against Joe Lozon.
Bloodfest.
The Bloodfest at UFC 155. I got a chance to talk to him for UFC.com in advance of this.
Plug.
And we sort of, absolutely. Shameless self-promotion.
Hey.
And we sort of laughed about an interview that he had done in UFC 360 magazine with our mutual friend, Chuck Mindenhall. And one of the quotes was, his aim is to put on another beautiful display of violence. I think that's what happens here. A lot of the guys Pat Healy beat on his way to his 6-fight winning streak, if you look back, they're now fighting at the featherweight division. There was a questionable decision in there over Mizuto Hirota. He didn't look particularly good against Kurt Holobaugh.
Holobaugh. There will be certain
sort
words.
Of just a.
There will be certain words where you notice I need to take a time out and just repeat in a vulgar fashion that nobody will ever repeat anywhere, but I just feel the need. So go on. Hold the ball.
I think this is one of those fights where Pat Healy was in a position to challenge Gilbert Melendez for the Strikeforce title before that organization closed their doors and Gilbert got injured and couldn't face Pat Healy on 2 different occasions. And so you have to bring him in at a certain level in the rankings and in terms of, where he was going to be in Strikeforce, comparable to where he is now in the UFC. But it's a tough matchup. I think Jim Miller is a more polished striker, a more powerful striker. I think he's better in the transitions on the ground, and I think that's where he'll end up really dominating, is sort of staying out of bad spots, really dominating on the feet and the striking, and get another really impressive decision victory.
See, before you were saying that Miller was going to finish Healy.
I did. But my switch is because if you look at Pat Healy, it's funny, the last time Pat Healy was defeated, was finished, was his one and only UFC appearance to date, which is like 6-7 years ago now, against Anthony Torres. So I'm not sure. Anthony Torres.
Exactly.
Is a name from the past. Yes.
Exactly.
I'm not sure Jim Miller will be the first of X number of fighters since to finish him, but I think he will dominate this fight.
Davis versus Magalhaes. Magalhaes. I don't speak Portuguese. Again, I have not received my Rosetta Stone yet. But Phil Davis, Vinny Magalhaes, give us your take, ESK. Who are you picking in this fight?
First and foremost, I want to give credit to Vinny Magalhaes for getting this fight. He essentially learned from the man he trains with, Chael P. Sonnen.
Chael P.
Talked his way into this fight. Phil Davis was supposed to fight Forrest Griffin. That fight fell through. Vinny said, I'll do it. If you've watched the Countdown show, you now know the progression of, I'll fight him at heavyweight. Well, that's not going to work. Well, I'll fight him here. No, I don't want to fight him here. And eventually this fight comes together. So kudos to Vinny for working the interwebs, for working Twitter to its one of its potentials, and getting this fight. As Phil Davis said in the Countdown piece, sometimes you get what you ask for, and sometimes that's not good.
Sometimes it's not. Vinny is a black belt and a pretty good badass in terms of jiu-jitsu. And Davis is admittedly a blue belt, but I think he told you something different, didn't he?
Yeah, he told me he's a white belt. I talked to Phil not before this fight, but in the past, and I asked him about sort of his belt ranking, and he was like, I don't even know why it says I'm a blue belt. I'm a white belt. But regardless of where he falls in belt structure, we have seen Phil Davis's submission game.
And
we know Phil Davis's wrestling game. I wrote a piece yesterday saying Phil Davis is sort of the forgotten man in the division who
I saw that.
Who after headlining against Rashad Evans has fallen sort of into the abyss in the light heavyweight division. And I'm not sure why. I think he makes a statement here. I think we see the Penn State pedigree, lots of wrestling. I don't know that he can finish Vinny because, as you said, world champion on the ground in no-gi jiu-jitsu. So I think he'll do a very good job of defending. I and Phil looks for submissions more than he looks for ground and pound. But I think this is a complete whitewashing and a complete sweep of the scorecards, where Vinny kind of is just happy that he got a fight with a top 10 guy and got on a pay-per-view, because that's not necessarily what happens after you beat Igor Pokrayets in your first fight back in the UFC.
You know, this particular podcast is featured on a website that has a large Brazilian audience, and the one Brazilian on the main card is being picked to lose by this Canadian man, E. Spencer Kite. So if you want to send any hate mail, feel free to forward it to eric.fontanez@graciemag.com, and I'll be sure to put it on blast on Twitter. Speaking of which, follow us on Twitter at Spencer Kite and at Eric_Fontanez in case you want to follow us and chat up some MMA, UFC, and hey, even some basketball if you have the time or any interest. Next fight, Congo versus Nelson. I think we both agreed on the outcome of this fight. I think Chick Congo, as great of an interview as he is for me, is going to get knocked out cold. Roy Nelson has an overhand right that a lot of people can see coming from a mile away, but for some reason, Congo needs to wear his glasses in the octagon, and I don't think he'll see that coming. I'm thinking KO or TKO in the second round. I'm giving Nelson the first round to kind of get his feel, but finishing it in the second round. ESK, what say you?
Yeah, I agree. I'm not even sure it gets to the second round. I think Roy is a dude that he gets underrated, and we forget how good he is because it's easy to look at the packaging and not take it seriously because of the mullet and because of the beard
and the belly,
because he has a giant belly. But he's also got thunder in that right hand, as you said. He has a phenomenal ground game if he ever needs to go there. Mm-hmm. And I just, in looking, you look back at Cheick Kongo's last few fights, and there's the loss to Mark Hunt. There's the really sort of uninteresting stall fight at UFC 149 with Sean Jordan, where it was really just a lot of clinching along the cage. A solid win over Matt Mitrione.
We were clinching against the cage. This is what we do in Francais.
A solid but sort of, again, unspectacular win over Matt Mitrione. And then before that was the comeback knockout win of Pat Barry, which he was on roller skates and nearly finished it. And so you take that with the fact that Roy's knocked out a couple dudes in a row. We know he's got that right hand. We know he's going to hunt for it. And we've seen Congo do a bad job of defending big shots from smaller dudes.
He's made a bad habit of getting hit by smaller guys who have overhand rights.
Yes.
That is the clincher right there. He's going to lose this fight. And again, I say again, I've interviewed Congo a bunch of times, and he's always been a really good guy. He's always been a good interview. He called me on the Skype, and I talked to him, and I printed his stuff. But sorry, Chick, you're going to lose this one. Bisping versus Belcher in the co-main event. Michael Bisping was talking a lot on the conference call earlier this week, and Alan Belcher had his opportunity to talk, and he was just like, yeah. So, who are we picking to win this one?
I am picking Michael the Count Bisping.
The Count?
I found it really fun that Alan Belcher had not a lot to say on the conference call, and conversely, like, Bisping has decided that fight week is when he will start talking again. He sort of went quiet for a period and didn't respond to any of Alan Belcher's videos. And then once fight week hit, Alan Belcher was like, okay, I'm done. I need to be focused and not telling jokes anymore. To me, Bisping is a dude that as much as we all want to knock him for not being able to clear that final hurdle, he's a lot better than we give him credit for. His wrestling is better than we give it credit for. He's only lost to guys that are sort of in the hunt and a little further ahead in their careers and on the rankings than a guy like Alan Belcher. Obviously, anything can happen, and this could be the opportunity where sort of Alan Belcher takes that next step forward and Michael Bisping takes another step back. But I can't watch that fight Alan Belcher had his second fight with Yushin Okami, see him have absolutely nothing to offer on the ground and think that he's going to really come out and put on a really good show against a guy like Bisping, who has that underrated wrestling. Not that he's the same kind of grappler as Yushin Okami, but has the ability to take you down and put you into the fence. We saw it against Chael Sonnen, who he out-wrestled. We saw it in pieces with Brian Stan. He didn't out-wrestle Chael Sonnen, but he did in periods. He held his own with a guy that we talk about as the best, one of the best wrestlers in MMA. And Bisping's a guy that he has that relentless pace that he comes out and he's not throwing smoke at you. He's not looking to, he doesn't have that one-shot knockout power, but he stays on you for 15 minutes at the same tempo, doesn't give you much of a chance to really breathe and sort of get your balance and get settled. And I think Alan Belcher needs that. I think he's a guy that he'll go hard for 30 or 40 seconds and then need to regroup and need to sort of get ready for that next push. And Michael Bisping doesn't give you that opportunity.
There was an opportunity to say that's what she said during that rant of yours, but I held back because I wanted you to make your point. And I agree with you that Michael Bisping's going to win this one. I think his best attribute, on top of everything else, his underrated wrestling, his ability to strike with guys, is his endurance. He could go 5 rounds if he needed to and still look really good. I mean, obviously his opportunities have only been at 3 rounds, but every time he's gone that distance, he's always looked fresh. Going into the third round and finishing it. So I think that's going to be the difference here. He's going to be able to pepper Belcher and control the fight for the majority of the 3-round affair, and he's going to get the W. You were going to say something, SK?
I was just going to say, and for all the things we want to knock Michael Bisping about, 19 fights now in the UFC, every single one of them on the main card, 11 consecutive. No lower on the fight card than third. So he's been sort of that main event, co-main event, face on the poster guy for a really long time. Mm-hmm. And as much as you say, yeah, but who has he beaten? There's not a lot of guys that have had that kind of longevity. And part of the reason is because he doesn't lose he's never lost 2 fights in a row. And he always gets those wins where he needs to and has that good performance where he needs to. He needs to have one here. And history shows us that this is usually where Michael Bisping gets a bounce back win.
The best middleweight never to be the best middleweight.
Right.
I said it first. You're not going to steal that from me for one of your columns, man. I said it first, patent pending. In
you
the main event,
I already steal it.
The main event, Jon Jones, the ultimate lord of light heavyweights, fighting what the UFC is trying to sell as the number 2 lord of the light heavyweights, Chael Sonnen. I think everybody knows that this fight is going to go one way in Jones's favor. Do you actually see Chael with the chance here of winning against Jon Jones?
I don't, but I will put the little asterisks as I did in a column for one of the myriad outlets and places that I write earlier today. None of us expected Chael Sonnen to dominate the first 22 minutes of his first fight with Anderson Silva. Now, of course, the outcome was still that he lost, but we didn't expect that first 22 minutes to happen. And so I will give Chael that sort of glimmer of hope. That being said, I think this turns into a Jon Jones destructive symphony of violence where he just makes a statement and says, can I be done with this joker? Give me some real challengers. And if there aren't any left in this division, I'm going to go do some other stuff.
Yeah, I can't. I mean, if you just look at Jon's body language during fight week with all the media that he's done, and just notice, where he's standing, how he's looking, he's just like, God, is this week done yet? Can I go home? Like, I'm done here. I just want to get out of here. And that's really how he's taking the fight, in my opinion. Anyway, he's looking at Sonnen as just another guy that's coming in, that's trying to sell this fight for more than it's worth. And mind you, I personally don't think that it's worth $55 in HD, $50 in Canada. Screw you, ESK. And it's just way too apparent. I think the first time that we really saw that was during one of the recent broadcasts. The interview, I think it was Jon Anik that was interviewing both Chael Sonnen and Jon Jones. And
the
Sonnen,
most awkward interview ever.
And props to Anik for being able to hold court there and not crack a smile saying, man, I can't believe this shit. But he did, and Jon was very much, I don't have anything to say. And as soon as he dismissed him, Jon went back to his chair, and then Sonnen went back into his pro wrestling shtick and was trying to sell the fight.
Yes. Shout out to our boy Jon Anik for definitely maintaining there, because it really was the most awkward thing in the world. I think Jon is he's over this fight. It's been a long build up. Chael definitely talked his way into it with sort of the starting at UFC 151 and working his way up to, I still want to fight this guy. There's enough interest just because I think this fight has lost momentum over the course of The Ultimate Fighter because there wasn't that animosity that everybody expected. And if they were screaming at each other and breaking doors and being angry all throughout the show, there'd be a little bit more heat and more pop to this pay-per-view this weekend. I'm not fussy either way in regards to they should have been selling it more. I thought it was great that they actually got along. I thought they both did fantastic job as coaches, and I think a lot of people have a new appreciation for a different side of Chael Sonnen. But I think Jon's just ready to be done with it and move on to the next challenge.
I think we all are. And with that is the end of episode 1 of the Choke MMA podcast. Well done, ESK. I think you did very good for a co-host spot. What do you think?
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Your hosting skills are quite admirable. I look forward to doing this again next Friday and every subsequent Friday to fill people's Friday podcast needs.
And if you don't know what subsequent is, Google it, because we used Google for every bit of information for this podcast. So in review, Jones, Bisping, Congo, Davis, Miller, make your bets because we're never wrong. Just like every smart MMA journalist with their picks. Thanks for tuning in to the Choke MMA podcast. For E. Spencer Kite, I'm Erik Fontanez saying, see you next week.